All right. Well, thanks for having me here today. It's a pleasure to discuss a little bit about this topic, why we should prepare. And I have done this a little bit through the lens of semiconductor industry. I think we will hear much more also about applications and these topics, but I will give it this kind of a spin and angle. And I brought you 5 observations, and I tried to make this connection between what is happening in the semiconductor world, or has been happening, basically Moore's law going on for decades, and how this actually might reflect then on quantum, and how can we see some analogies there. So yeah, it's great to be here. As said, we are also similar to Rigetti, a company. We build quantum computers, and in our case also these superconducting systems. Often these golden chandeliers are then the pictures that you see. This is actually not when they're operating. When they're operating, it's just a very kind of boring metal can. But then we kind of in these marketing materials, we use these pictures which are much more shiny and golden. We are around 300 people in different locations around the world, but headquartered, and most of us actually in Finland. So the first one, and I think nowadays when you talk about compute industry, there's no way to ignore NVIDIA and what is going on there. And what I've brought you here, the first observation is actually how does the stock price of NVIDIA here compare to Intel? And it's not so much about the overall, like the value, but what I want to talk a little bit is the structure that you see on top of it. So with Intel, usually we talk about general purpose computing with these systems, whereas NVIDIA, the graphical processors, obviously they were designed in the first place to do graphical kind of video gaming and these kind of things. But actually what we see here, basically reflected in the share price, are these kind of peaks, which correspond to the unlocking of different applications. So the first one there, this was roughly the kind of crypto mining cycle. Then there was this other one, and we heard this in the previous speech during the COVID time. So there was a lot of computing actually related to this. But then also people kind of were stuck at home. They were just playing and doing things like this. So this is what you can attribute to this one. And then, of course, most recently, the AI and LLM topic. And there's so much need for compute power, which you basically see here. And actually, it's also interesting because often people say the value is mainly created on the software side and the applications, which is, of course, true to a certain extent. But here you see what really happens if there's a need and a scarcity for hardware. And you see this really nicely here. So what does this mean now for quantum computing, and how do we position ourselves there? Is basically that we design also our systems for specific applications, and we try to get the best out of the hardware. Because at the moment, as we heard previously, these systems are still noisy, you're a bit limited in what you can do, so we really try to squeeze out everything out of the system by adjusting the hardware to the software. And we think that in this NISQ regime that was explained nicely, we can unlock some of the applications already there. So this is the first thing. The second thing, which is often not mentioned actually, but it's very powerful, are the design tools. So in semiconductor industry, there's actually a huge and very growing market on the design side. Basically you see here the predictions, how it's going to grow from 22 to 2030. You have companies like Cadence and Synopsys doing these and really trying to automate it. People are nowadays trying to build digital twins for the processors. So there's actually a lot of kind of simulation going on. This is actually also something, if you think about Moore's law, one way why it has been going on over the time is because with the better computers that we have developed, we have then already developed the next chip generations. And I think also here there's a lot of computing need behind these design tools, and actually some of these algorithms are also suitable for quantum computers. But actually the thing is that with these design tools, there's usually no quantum feature involved. So it's not easy to kind of design a quantum processor with the conventional software that is out there. And I think this is going to be a market by itself, which at the moment isn't yet really existing because the industry is still so early stage and immature. But this is actually something that we think is very valuable because it really helps you also accelerating on this way to quantum advantage. The logic is very simple. If you design a chip and then you test it and it doesn't work, you have to go back, and this takes time and money, obviously. So this is why actually we invest quite a lot in our own design tool. So this is just a software tool which you can use for layout purposes, and the layout part is actually open source. But then there are the simulation backends which really help us then to simulate the behavior of the quantum processor so that we are sure that the processor is kind of working before we actually produce it. So this is the second part, and as said, I think this is going to be very, very powerful, and we make this actually open source because, I mean, I did this myself doing my PhD, sitting there and drawing by hand. This is extremely cumbersome, and there's a lot of automation in the software, and we hope that actually the universities then adopt this, and there's also much more good science then being enabled by such kind of initiatives. All right, and then the third one is the actual chip itself. So here we look at the Q4 income statement from TSMC, and the interesting part here is kind of the distribution. And you see this blue line on the left-hand side. This is high-performance computing. So basically, this is AI and LLM. So you see that the revenue fraction in this high-performance computing market is already almost 50% for companies like TSMC. And there is a huge need for such kind of high-performance chips. Which is, of course, for us a good sign because we know also that some of the problems we want to solve will not be solved with these high-performance computing chips, but you need something like quantum or other topics. And we think that this is going to grow even further. So the compute demand is just increasing over time more and more, and there is a huge need to kind of produce better and more high-performance computing chips. So someone needs to have these capabilities, and actually the way quantum computing at the moment happens is it's kind of coming out of the university labs and the research institutes, and people have been producing these chips in this kind of academic or semi-academic environment, but there are very few companies actually who are operating their own chip fabrication facilities, and this is something that we have done. Also others, of course, have done it, but we have done in Finland. We have built actually our own chip fabrication facility. You see there some pictures, also some of the wafers. So in the end, this is silicon technology, and for us, of course, this is super helpful because we can take all of this know-how and experience that has been developed over the decades on the semiconductor side and now apply it to quantum. And I think there will be still a huge acceleration as more and more of these people who have done it on the semiconductor side enter the quantum industry and teach physicists like me how to actually properly do the chip production. And we think that this really helps also then on kind of growing to these millions of qubits that we need in the end for having fault-tolerant systems. And then the fourth one is the system thinking and really having system performance, which you need. Of course, we want that all of the individual components in the computer work well, but then actually there's lots of value if you have the overall system know-how and can optimize the whole architecture. So what you see here is Moore's law is the blue line, and then how NVIDIA has put a lot of effort into kind of increasing the system performance. Because in the end, if you want to do useful stuff, you cannot only think about the processor or the chip, but you need to think how it all plays together. And I think one of the strengths here in NVIDIA is that they have also this kind of software stack so that people can actually use and program the GPUs. And this is very true also for quantum, right? You can have the best computer, the best hardware, but it doesn't help you if no one can really use it because there's not the proper software stack on top of it. And there's actually a lot of know-how. We had already error mitigation, error correction. All of these kind of things needs to be developed, and many people are working on this. And we are actually having a very similar approach, very open, very collaborative. And we think it's really something where we need to bring the best minds together to then develop the best systems out of it. And this is a lot what we do. So we have, of course, our own processors in the computer, but then we have a lot of other technology that we just take from third-party components. And there's actually really a building up of a supply chain ecosystem at the moment, and we are seeing more and more providers for individual components, which is really encouraging for the industry, of course, going forward to see this kind of maturity going up. And then what we also do is optimizing the software really for the systems that we build to get the performance out. And this is also a known concept from computing, co-design, that you really bring the software and the hardware aspects together to make it work in the end. And then finally, of course, and this is for most people, of course, the most interesting part is on the application side. So what can you really do with the computers that we have? And if you go out there, I think this is now Boston Consulting, but you find similar studies from McKinsey or any of your favorite analyst firms. The thing is that we know many applications that will be disrupted by quantum computers. But we also know that it's still a way to go there. And we heard this earlier. The real question is, okay, how long does it take take. And for me, the important thing is also that it's not going to be black and white, that at the moment nothing is working and then suddenly there's a day and afterwards all of these applications will be unlocked. But it's more like we saw in this first chart with NVIDIA, basically application by application, the hardware will become powerful enough to then unlock the applications. But these are the typical fields that you often kind of see: simulation. So this is really in the sense of Richard Feynman, one of the early kind of physicists who has been pushing these ideas when he said, nature isn't classical, and if you want to simulate nature, you better make it quantum mechanical. So this is this kind of thinking. If you want to simulate complex molecules, for example, this is often quantum physics that's happening there, and this is one of the problems where quantum computers actually can help. But then also the optimization part, we have heard about this already, and this is obviously a nice thing because optimization you find basically everywhere. In each industry, probably you have a problem that you want to optimize and which is rather complex, and you cannot do it. Machine learning, of course, even especially today in this kind of LLM, AI hype, this is super important, and there are some ideas. And then, of course, the last one, the cryptography part, this is something that actually fueled the quantum computing story in the beginning, when in, I think, 1993, Peter Shor came up with this algorithm that you can use to factorize large numbers, which is basically then a way to break something like RSA. And this is still, of course, a big driver, mainly for the governments to invest heavily into this field and make sure that the technology is being developed. And this is something that we do also mainly in partnerships. We want to be kind of agnostic to whatever the application will be, but we have a small team in-house which is then thinking about how, if you want to solve this application, what does it mean on the algorithm level, and how do you map then this algorithm to our hardware. So this is mainly kind of what we care about and what we do. So these were the 5 points, and then maybe one more slide is more on the kind of financing side, because this is obviously also interesting. We have private players, big names like Google and IBM, we heard it already, but then of course a lot of the innovation is actually driven by startups, and for them it's always this question, how do you fund these kind of technologies which have very long time scales and a lot of capital needs for all the hardware that we are building. So we did a study together with Quantum Insider, and actually I found this graph quite interesting, which is comparing the numbers from 22 and 23 on the investment side, and you see it for the 3 different big regions, Americas, Europe, and APAC. And I think what we see here is also a little bit the mentality, the investment mentality. So overall, of course, we know that the investments in the tech sector have been going down, but we see this actually very pronounced on the US side. So people have been pulling out of the quantum investments, where Europe maybe is a little bit, it's overall lower in level, but then maybe a little bit more steady, accepting these kind of waves. And actually in Europe, even the number has slightly increased from 22 to 23. APAC also a little bit gone down. But I think, and many people have been asking me about this kind of quantum winter question, and is it going to go down? For me, this was always only an effect of generally kind of decreasing tech investments. And we have recently actually seen a few very big rounds in the quantum sector and in different technologies. So I think there's really hope, and there's also a lot of progress. There have been amazing results from many companies going towards error correction. And this was always for me the kind of hopefulness, seeing that the field is actually developing. And as long as we keep on kind of hitting the milestones, I think there's actually a bright future for this. All right, then I was also asked to give a bold statement, of course, yeah, we heard already. It's always hard to predict the future, but what I find interesting about quantum, and this is maybe a little bit philosophical also, is that basically we're talking here not about doing something that we can do already now just faster or cheaper, but it's really building machines that will give us answers to questions where we otherwise never will get the answer. And this, of course, can let you dream, right? And this is something where I think speculation is allowed, because it's really hard to say what do we develop actually on the way that is coming out if we can suddenly answer things that at the moment we don't even dare asking. So I think this is for me really the fascinating part, and something that to always keep in mind. We are not doing this in order to somehow continue Moore's law and make sure that the computing computing is going to increase also in the future, but we are doing this because we want ultimately provide answers to some of the really challenging questions that we have out there, and answer questions that otherwise we would never be able to solve. But I will not dare to make some of these dreams, but I think everyone at home with a glass of wine or so can think about this a little bit and get creative. So thank you.